Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back again with Matt Kelly for another episode of the award-winning Compliance Into the Weeds. Today, we're absolutely thrilled to be joined by Mary Inman. Mary has just gotten back from the United Kingdom and has some incredibly exciting news about whistleblowers and whistleblower protection. And we're going to tie that into a blog post Matt wrote about the Europeans in the form of the English, or the United Kingdom, I should say, France and Switzerland, forming a joint effort to fight anti-corruption or fight corruption. So, Matt, you want to start us off with the new joint venture?
We have a new joint venture. And to be honest, that is probably the bulk of what we know about this. However, it was announced last Friday where there had been a meeting of the Serious Fraud Office in the United Kingdom, the Parquet National Financier in France. I hope my elementary school French has come through and I pronounced that correctly. And the Office of the Attorney General in Switzerland. The three of them gathered in London to speak at an anti-corruption event where they announced this new cross-border group that will work to develop best practices for cross-border anti-corruption prosecutions. They're going to have a leaders group that I guess would be the director of the SFO, the PNF, and the Swiss AG. The three leaders there would meet regularly. There's going to be a lower level working group to develop best practices and principles for how they would coordinate these large anti-corruption cases. But let's not kid ourselves, people. That's just the detail stuff. The big message here, quite clearly, was that if the United States is going to retreat from enforcement of anti-corruption law, Europe is going to band together and fill that vacuum. I guess that means we will see more joint prosecutions at some point. We have seen kind of sort of that in the past because we have seen cross-border investigations that involved all three of these countries plus the United States. But historically, the U.S. has been the lead. And now, if President Trump and AG Pam Bondi want to either pause FCPA enforcement or retreat from it entirely, I'm not sure what I believe might be forthcoming after the pause, but, I wouldn't rule out a full retreat. Europe is going to step in and fill that vacuum. And let us also note now that somehow along the way, the United Kingdom has kind of snuck back into Europe conceptually, at least, even if legally they are not part of the European Union. Clearly, they're on Team Europe here that they're going to keep big anti-corruption investigations going. It's still a thing.
I guess, Matt, the first thing that I thought when I saw this announcement was the following. Late February, early March, I did a series of webinars on the executive order issued by Trump and for countries outside the United States. They were Brazil and the Far East. And the sentiment was, who's going to enforce anti-corruption across the world if the U.S. is not going to do it? And I didn't say this, but it was basically, you guys are going to do it. You in Hong Kong, you in Brazil, you in Singapore, you in England, you in France. You all have robust laws. You've been doing this. You've worked with the United States. You know how to do an enforcement action. You know how to do an investigation, and you will step up and do it. And now we have seen the exact evidence of that. And it strikes me that this is a development that was sure to come out of Trump's executive order. And I think the rest of the world will do exactly this, and they will take leadership on this issue.
I guess they're going to try. The proof remains in the pudding, which we have yet to see, but I know that we have occasionally seen enforcement of, for example, the UK Bribery Act without the United States. I don't think that's happened often, but I know that it has happened. I am not quite sure how vigorous anti-corruption has been in France or Switzerland without the United States involved, but they're no stranger to how this should unfold. Although the United States had always been the one setting the tempo, but the United States doesn't need to set the tempo. And I think given everything else that the Trump administration has been doing lately to basically give the middle finger to Europe, I wouldn't be surprised if they want to pick up this ball and run with it quite vigorously. We should note that yes, the first three are the UK, France, and Switzerland, but it looks like they don't expect it to be only those three. They did actually say in their statement, which is all of one page, it's not much of a statement, but just kind of planting the flag. But their statement did say that they will invite, quote, other like minded agencies, close quote, to join their task force. I know that we have seen a greater uptick in the adoption of modern anti corruption laws across other European countries, Spain, such as Italy. I don't know whether they will go all the way as to reach Brazil with its Clean Companies Act. And Tom, with all due respect, I would not include Hong Kong anymore as a serious anti corruption player because they are essentially now part of China. And good luck convincing me that anti corruption is really taken that seriously in China. It's still a corrupt country, and the government there is still corrupt. However, we have plenty of other countries that are trying to take corruption seriously. And these are the three. They are the front end of the spear. I don't know how big that spear is going to get, but I get the sense that Europe wants to build up this capacity to keep on doing things absent the United States, which is a kind of a sorry sense that the United States has abdicated its leadership here, but there's a lot of that going around these days.
I didn't say who Hong Kong would prosecute.
Fair.
Certainly not going to be Chinese domestic companies. But Mary Inman, you've just been in Europe. You've got some exciting news to share with us about what you found out there. But before you get to that, how do you see all this playing out? I mean, you've lived in London. You work with a serious fraud office, I'm going to guess. So, and they are now sort of reinvigorated domestically after their last. How do you see the SFO and maybe France in this role?
Delighted to be on today. I'm fresh off the boat. I had the great honor of actually having a one-on-one meeting with the head of the SFO while I was there, Nick F. Graves, and I'll explain why. Nick F. Graves is not a lawyer. He actually comes to the head role as an investigator in Gumshoe. And when I start to think about who are going to be the leaders in the anti-corruption space, I always look at who's being serious about embracing whistleblowers, because as we all know, one of the best tools to bringing these major prosecutions have been protecting and incentivizing whistleblowers. Had the pleasure of speaking to Nick because since he's taken over as the leadership, he has made full-throated endorsements for adopting what he calls an American-style whistleblower reward program. He was keen to get my views on what you need to do to have a successful bar there. He brought over before bringing over me, he brought over the DOJ team and Nicole Argentieri, which is still at DOJ, and another team to talk about it. My belief here is that, just Matt said, that space abhors a vacuum, and in the absence of American leadership, the SFO has tried to jump into the breach. I would note that, remember, Switzerland is not a member of the EU, although they are Europe. So I do think it's actually quite significant that we see them in this role also with France. So in terms of who else we think might come on the tip of the spear with these other parties, I actually think Australia is the country we didn't talk about before. And I say that again because we've seen continued interest and renewed interest in whistleblower reforms there as well. That's my prediction. But I can tell you that Nick F. Graves is an incredibly charismatic, compelling, and ambitious leader. He has the ear of his government, which is a Labour Party government, which in one of their party platforms, they did have whistleblower rewards. They've been very keen on anti-corruption. It is a positive development because, as you said, we need someone to carry the mantle. And these three, for now, seem keen on doing it. And my suspicion is that Nick was leading the charge in this.
Why don't you share with us, there was not just your visit with the SFO. It seems like several other agencies in the United Kingdom also are gravitating to the position you've advocated for years, which is robust whistleblowing leads to robust enforcement.
Yeah, and this one I've been banging on, to use the British phrase, I've been banging on for years of the idea that if the UK was to adopt a whistleblower reward program, the easiest move for them to do would be to take a discretionary program that they have at their tax authority. It's called HMRC. They pronounce their H's as H's. HMRC, His Majesty's Treasury and Customs. His Majesty's Revenue and Customs. And they announced last week that rolling out in the fall, they will convert their discretionary program to a mandatory one. They are doing that as part of their efforts to go after tax dodgers and tax evasion and to close the tax gap. I was not expecting it. I thought the SFO would be first. The SFO actually needs enacting regulations to adopt a reward program. So that's why they're, I think, talking closely to the Labor Party. But HMRC already had that authority and they just converted it to mandatory. And it was quite extraordinary and quite exciting. So the details they gave is that the program will be launched in the fall. They're talking about a reward scheme that would be 10% floor to whistleblowers who cooperate with the ceiling of 25%. No mention of caps. I hope it stays that way. The Canadian program, and at least in Ontario, has a $5 million cap. A whistleblower can get more than that. Seems really good. The devil will be in the details, but I faced very stiff headwinds when I lived there for 3 years and worked there in terms of that it wasn't British to pay whistleblowers, that they blow the whistle because it's the right thing to do. They don't need to be paid. And it's sure that was a very strong view. And it's just amazing for me to see the change, the wind shift. And I think it has a lot to do with this anti-corruption sentiment right now.
Matt, you got any questions or comments for Mary?
Just some comments, things that popped into my head as I was listening to you, Mary. Actually, I was quite intrigued when you mentioned Australia as one possible member of this emerging task force, although I think that's an excellent suggestion. I had wondered if maybe the Nordic countries would probably join fairly quickly because they are well known for their anti-corruption bona fides. But this leads me to another point is if you're a global compliance officer, you might now be wondering, and this is where I'm curious as well, are you thinking, oh crap, am I really going to have 19 different anti-corruption regimes? I'm going to have to mold my internal controls too. I think this is going to be a question worth watching, although I suspect the answer is probably no, but probably doing a lot of work there. If you have multiple countries pledging to cooperate on anti-corruption, but they each have their own anti-bribery statutes, which are kind of sort of similar, but not identical, you're probably going to need some sort of a framework to follow. So could we see more adoption of the ISO frameworks for anti-corruption systems, which are already quite popular in Europe and most of the world, but not the United States? I don't think you would go wrong if you still took the U.S. compliance program guidelines from the Justice Department. And I would advise you take them now while you can, because you never know when the Trump administration might rescind them or just make them disappear from the web. But I think if you followed that blueprint from the Justice Department so far, I don't think you'd go wrong there. And there's a lot of overlap between them and ISO standards and everything else. But at a practical level, for compliance officers at large global companies wondering, how am I going to build a comprehensive framework? You're going to have to start thinking about, where do these standards come from? Is it COSO? Is it ISO? Is it the Justice Department guidelines, which are not a framework in the strictest sense, but they're a pretty good roadmap? That is the thing that we'll have to think about. Maybe I'm making more of a mountain than it is, but nonetheless. And the other point I want to make, and then I'll stop, Mary, I was also thinking about how you said for so long, whistleblower awards were simply not British. And now suddenly the wind has changed. And why has the wind changed? I'm willing to bet the weather pattern change could be tracked back to January 20th, 2025, because I have been struck. Lately, I've spent a lot of time talking with European and Canadian compliance professionals and colleagues that Donald Trump seems to have this electrifying, unifying effect on others, that they will do what is necessary to basically give him the middle finger back when he has done this, whether that is with tariffs or anything else. But maybe the metaphor that could be used is like when you get dumped by a rich spouse, number one, you're really angry that you got dumped. And then number two, you think, I got a ton of different things I need to get all my ducks in a row to be able to stand up on my own. That is what Europe is doing right now across a host of fronts. And perhaps that is a good thing for them. But there's no political downside right now to saying we're going to step up anti-corruption because Trump's not going to do it. A lot of Europeans would absolutely say, yes, that sounds right. We should do it. I think there's going to be a lot of natural support in Europe and Canada and elsewhere to fill this gap because A, it's the right thing to do, And B, it shows Donald Trump that he can't boss them around and he doesn't get to say that we're scrapping anti-corruption enforcement. The rest of the world will still do it. Compliance officers would be foolish to overlook that reality.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think in terms of weather patterns, what I can say has specific, not just to anti-corruption measures, but what I can say specifically to what changed the wind patterns and the weather patterns as to whistleblowers. There are a couple of things that it's not surprising to me. There was a big cultural issue that was a bit of a lightning rod in the UK, which is it ended up turning into a BBC movie and film, and it was a post office scandal. There's a great piece, if people want to see it, called Mr. Bates versus the Post Office. And I think it really raised the specter of why we need whistleblowers and made it sort of a national issue for them. So I think it was sort of almost, I feel like the way that Theranos and the Theranos scandal sort of the scales fell from people's eyes in America about what Silicon Valley is capable of. I feel like the Post Office scandal did something similar. Also, to get very wonkish, at the same time, a think tank at the Ministry of Defense in the UK called, it's the RUSI, the Royal United Services Institute, their Center for Financial Security, issued a 30-page research report saying that it's foolish not to incentivize whistleblowers to fight financial crime. So you finally got one of their government agencies issuing a very thorough research paper documenting the use case. And then I think the third piece of this, the third leg on the stool, is a Labor government that had a shadow minister who then became a minister named David Lammy, who's been pushing this travel to America, became a convert for rewards, and then put it as part of the party platform. So I feel like all of that was kindling for the Trump inauguration to sort of light on fire. And there's a lot of dry paper and wood to ignite. And I think that's what created this new movement. And so the last thing I should say is that I think it's going to be a trifecta. SFO is clearly gunning for their own program and probably has the ear of the Labor government and the MPs. HMRC, their tax authority, already has one. And what we're hearing is that their Financial Conduct Authority, their securities regulator, is having serious FOMO and is actually now finally saying, we believe in whistleblower rewards too. We might see a trifecta, which I never thought would happen, but the winds are fully changing. Now I just have to get greedy and ask for a False Claims Act.
Tom, I have one other question. Maybe you could answer this, or anybody. Do we know whether the United Kingdom or other European countries, do they have compliance monitorships as part of anti-corruption settlements, or is that a uniquely U.S. thing?
The Serious Fraud Office has that available, and it's actually available in France too, because if you recall, Airbus had a French UK monitor in addition to a US monitor.
Oh, go ahead, Tom.
Because I want to take the comment about Hong Kong and sort of run with that in the following manner. The Chinese are not going to prosecute domestic Chinese companies for corruption, although there is a very large anti-corruption campaign domestically as to government officials. Where they're going to use it is against foreign companies, i.e. the United States. And if the U.S., in the form of the U.S. Department of Justice, says we're going to have a much more liberal view of facilitation payments, we're going to take the U.S. Supreme Court's view that there has to be a direct quid pro quo before the action. And if you give something afterward, it's just a gratuity. That's not a bribe. Well, guess what? Both of those per se violate the UK Bribery Act. The UK Bribery Act does not have a facilitation payment exemption, and they have a failure to prevent bribery charge they can bring against executives. So even if they loosened U.S. standards, and you and I both have talked about, remember the 5-year statute. Hey, remember, you don't have to worry about that in the United Kingdom. You have violated the law right now, and you violated the law in France right now. So we could have more robust enforcement action against non-domestic French, Swiss, and United Kingdom companies. But I want to take all of this and your middle finger thought to a couple of other areas and see how far I can take Conspiracy Tom down the road. And the first one is that the U.S. has banned Fernandez de Kirchner, the former president of Argentina, from coming into the U.S., they would not give her a visa because of alleged corruption. If that ain't the pot calling the kettle black, I don't know what is. But so now we are not letting in a politician from a politician we don't like because she's socialist, and not going to let her in the country. The other thing that seems to me to be part of this middle finger is this whole new conspiracy theory that McDonnell Douglas fighters, the F-35, have some sort of kill switch, which would allow the U.S. government to make the planes inoperable in air if the sale to a current ally becomes a former ally. Whether that's true or not, it really doesn't matter because somebody believes it, and it's going to negatively impact U.S. trade. And so we're going to see this tit for tat, middle finger flipping back and forth. And I can't wait to see the devolution of the Canadian election into who is more anti-Trump to be the next PM of Canada. And that's exactly what's going to happen. And all of these countries have coalesced around exactly what you guys said, the fire that was started on January 20th. And it's just going to be a tit for tat and use these laws to attack, or even rumors to hurt U.S. trade and or punish U.S. companies. And even if the Trump administration says we're not going to enforce that in the United States. So it seems to me we're moving into a very different era. And the biggest point for me, I think you started with this, Matt, which was these countries have stepped up and said, we will be the leaders. And if they're going to be the leaders, that means the U.S. is not going to be the leader. And we've lost the world's leadership on an incredibly important moral issue that led to 9/11. And I don't know if we can ever get it back, hopefully, but now we're going to have, what if Brazil makes the same announcement? What if Germany makes the same decision? Australia, like Mary said, the Chinese did it once with GSK. They can do it again. So I think we're going to come out of this in a very different world with unintended consequences that the brilliance of this administration didn't even consider.
Tom, if I could just chime in there, I think compliance officers need to get their heads around a multipolar global compliance regime, which we really haven't had. We had Western style compliance led by the United States, and then everybody else kind of trailed along. But even if the United States doesn't prosecute anti-corruption ever again, which I am not sure that's going to happen, I wouldn't be surprised if 6 months from now, Pam Bondi realizes, oh, actually, there was the FCPA for a reason, and sometimes it's useful to prosecute the FCPA. Maybe we shouldn't. There's a lot of rediscovering the wheel with Trump administration people these days. We should remember that. But there's still going to be a lot of compliance burden in the United States. It's just going to look and feel very different. It's going to be a lot about workforce, immigration, anti-DEI issues, but you're still going to have a lot of compliance burdens there. And at the same time, you might have compliance issues in Europe that are going to look and feel very different now because they're still going to have anti-corruption. So this is a long-winded way of saying you could wind up having a lot to do because you're going to have two different regions of the world, possibly more, because we haven't really talked about China or other parts of the world, but they'll all be saying ethics and compliance for corporations and have very different interpretations of what that means and what's important. And you, the global compliance team, you're going to have to juggle all of it. And I'm not sure we fully grasp what that is going to be like, but clearly Europe is saying, if the United States creates a vacuum, we're going to fill it. And then you're going to have to deal with both of those things. And I don't know where that's going to take us, but it's not a road we've considered before.
Here is our get.
Can I jump in just on, it occurs to me, and you may have talked about this on other podcasts too, is that the role of the state AGs, like the states will also fill that vacuum. And we've seen a lot of them from day one of the Trump administration in states like California and Massachusetts and New York picking up the mantle, and maybe they all have securities law statutes themselves. So if the SEC is receding, as it seems to be on crypto and other issues, they can jump into the breach. So I do think that's another space that we're going to see more action, and we've already started to see more action.
Mary, as our guest, I wanted to end with a question to you back in your realm of whistleblowing. I've heard you talk from time to time about what companies need to do in the prior area of more robust whistleblowing in the United States. When we visited about that, when the Department of Justice announced their whistleblower program, what would you say to UK companies, French companies, or other companies who may not have thought about the benefits of having a speak up culture and how that can help their compliance program if their governments are going to use these tools to enforce laws?
I love this question because I think that Europe is unique given their World War II history, that particular countries in Europe, particularly France, Germany, and Italy, have a real resistance to whistleblowing. And it's something that they've already encountered and have to tackle with the EU whistleblowing directive that required companies of certain sizes to bring in internal reporting mechanism and a hotline. So I think so much work needs to be done and continue to be done around making sure that people understand the baggage that they bring and the stereotypes that they bring towards whistleblowers, and to unpack it and attack it with a lot of the social behavioral science and other empirical data that shows that not only are whistleblowers not disloyal, they're among your most loyal employees, and to see them as an asset, not a liability, and as folks who, as the canaries in the coal mine, can help you avert risk. I think it's Christian Hunt who coined the phrase of whistleblowers as risk management tools. And the more we can reinforce that and cite the research that we've seen, that companies who listen to whistleblowers are actually have a better effect on the bottom line, are more profitable than those who don't. I think that's what we have to hammer home to the C-suite and beyond. I think we made a lot, thanks to folks like you, we made a lot of headway with compliance officers. They're our allies in the whistleblowing and the importance of whistleblowers, but I still think we have a lot to do just to get against the cultural bias that we all hold about snitches and stitches and ditches.
And special bonus question, any thoughts on the CFTC having interim director who is a former whistleblower?
That can only be a good thing. That can only be a good and great thing because they're sensitive to the issues and they're also fearless. They're not going to back down. And so to me, having that intestinal fortitude at the CFTC is a great thing.
Well, Mary, it's always a ton of fun to have you on our pod. It's even more fun when I have Matt and you together and we can all hash these out. So from the both of us, thank you for coming on, and I hope we get to visit with you again.
Thank you so much for having me. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Tom.